for September 13th. Ms. Hutchison, will you please call the roll?
Here.
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 Here. Here.
Here. Ms. Blattner, will you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Dr. Schuler, can you introduce our guest, our host for this evening?
Sure can. So we are pleased to be at the Wiesbrook Elementary School this evening for our board meeting, and so I want to introduce Dr. Brian Torina, who's the principal here at Wiesbrook, and I think he's going to give a little intro to the host school presentation, and I think you're in for a little treat hearing from one of our learning communities going to tell you a great story. So, Dr. Torina.
Well, good evening. Thank you, Dr. Schuler. Welcome, Board of Education members, senior leadership team, and District 200 community members to Wiesbrook Elementary School, where it's tremendous to be a Tiger. I am proud and privileged to serve as principal of Wiesbrook Elementary School. One of our greatest assets is our wonderful staff. I'm so proud of how they've worked diligently and collectively the last 2 years to bring to life District 200's Vision 2026. I've witnessed how they have implemented accelerated learning with integrity and how they have committed to utilizing high-quality assessments to inform their instruction. John Hattie's research indicates that implementation of a research-based curriculum improves student learning. Again, I watched my staff the last 2 years collectively embrace District 200's new math curriculum, Illustrative Math. Our theme last year was Tigering Together is Best in the Jungle. This theme was based off the work and research of Trevor Reagan. Essentially, it means you learn best when things are hard. I witnessed my staff embrace the challenges of implementing illustrative math, which illustrates John Hattie's research that ultimately it's teachers that influence student learning the most. With the implementation of illustrative math came the challenge of utilizing and learning new assessments. Our math coach, Katie Glinke, worked collaboratively with our staff to understand how to utilize these assessments to inform instruction and ultimately improve student learning. Tonight, I want to share with you the story of our 4th grade team that exemplifies everything I've already talked about. They're here sitting right behind me to share their journey of implementing illustrative math. I am proud to share the fruits of their labor as we look at their impressive data metrics sitting in front of you. If you look at the metrics, we've included their FastBridge scores and their FastBridge growth, their IR scores, and their students' ratings of them on 5 essential learnings, comparing the last 2 years. So without going over those percentages, you can see the tremendous growth that they've had. After seeing these metrics, Melissa Murphy called me on the phone because she said, "What did your team do? And are you okay with me coming to interview them?" And I said, "I am, under one caveat, as long as I could be there also." Because I was just so proud and willing for them to be able to, and excited for them to share their story. The next slide is notes from the actual interview that Melissa and I had with them. So I'm going to turn it over to my team because I'm here. I'm extremely proud of them, and you need to hear their story.
Hi, my name is Roseanne Kornack, and I teach 4th grade. So first of all, I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about our PLC practices. We truly take PLC to another level a little bit. We spend a lot of time together. We pretty much meet every day, before school, at lunch, and after school most days, talking about learning. So we met daily, every day, and because it was new, we talked about math, the lesson. We talked about our misconceptions, things that we didn't understand. We literally, like Robin says, left our egos at the door and kind of had to say, like, I don't get it, so that we could talk through our lessons and understand where our kids might have misconceptions. So we also stuck together every day. We would talk before school. We would teach the lesson. We would touch base at lunchtime. Then we did another math block in the afternoon. We'd kind of take care of things. And then at the end of the day, we would kind of regroup and decide, were the kids ready to move on? Did we need to do something else? How were we going to change the learning for the next day?
I'm Janine Norris, and I'm also a current fourth grade teacher. And one of the things we talked about is when Roseanne had piloted the year before these group, that we said we're a team, so we're all in, and we all piloted with her. So we all had that a little extra planning time and knowledge of the curriculum, so that when we got to the following year, we were all really experienced in it. We knew the district had adopted it, so we went with it for the rest of the year. In the springtime, we had taught fractions, so we jumped in with fractions, which started with IM, which was very difficult for some of the kids, and we felt like we had an extra year of practice with it with the students. Some of the things that we talk about is just the differentiation between the kids, and when we see kids who are struggling a little bit, and we see kids who have mastered the standard, we would kind of figure out what we needed to do with them. If they've mastered it, we gave them a few challenge things. If they hadn't mastered it, we said, what do they need to supplement to get there? And the kids that just need a little more practice had a little more practice with it. So when we found out where we were lying each time, we would kind of group the kids a little bit for a day, for a lesson, here and there, just to give them the pieces that they needed to move on to the next level.
Hi, my name's Robin Barris. I was part of the fourth grade team. This year I'm actually teaching third grade. One of the things that we have grown to embrace and really love with IM is all the assessments that come with the program, both formative and summative. They just provide so much useful feedback to us as teachers as we're, planning for instruction. So it comes with checkpoints to help us kind of guide us through as we're in the middle of the unit. It has cool downs, which I'll talk about. Comes with great practice problems that really align to the end of the unit assessment. Same verbiage and just great practice. And then the end of the unit assessments were great too. And one of the things that we loved about the assessments is that they really align to other assessments that the kids take, including the IAR, particularly in regards to kids needing to show their thinking and explain their reasoning. So that's one of the things that we love about the program. The cool downs have been extremely useful. We use those at the end of each lesson, and they really give us a great litmus to see how kids grasp the concepts of that day's lesson. And really allow us to sit down. There were a lot of days where we would bring our cool downs with our lunches and sit down at the lunch table in the teacher's lounge and kind of talk about, okay, who got it that day, and who needs to get a little bit more practice, or divide that up and differentiate to meet everybody's needs, just based on those daily feedback with the cool downs. So those were extremely helpful in planning our day-to-day. And then also with the 60-minute math block, and then at the very end of the day, we also had a 30-minute fluency block, which was extremely helpful. We would use that for the centers that came with the program as well, so that those would just reinforce lessons or topics from the lesson earlier in the day, but it also provided us time to sort of triage and pull kids into small groups, and work with kids who showed, maybe with the cool down that they didn't quite have it from that day. So it gave us a lot of opportunity to meet the needs of all the kids.
Thanks to our fourth grade team, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say we do have one fourth grade team member, Emily Fox, who is not able to be here tonight, but just want to recognize her work also with this. One of the things that they didn't mention and they didn't talk about up here was the amount of vulnerability they had to have last year as a team. I'll take particularly looking at like Janine and Roseanne, who are veteran teachers and were very skilled at their craft and had done some things, as we all do, the same way for a long time. But it took a lot of courage and vulnerability for them to be able to really be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And they spent a lot of time sharing their vulnerabilities with staff. We would have staff sharing sessions at each of our faculty meetings. So they didn't share that. And I also got the pleasure of seeing how relentless they really are in terms of when they say they meet daily, not just daily, but multiple times a day, before school, after school, in the hallways, walking by them, I can hear them. They're always talking about their planning and what they're going to do, or what kids did, or what worked, or what didn't work, or what they saw in their assessment. So it's really neat to see that, and it's a joy as a principal to be able to have a team like that on my staff. So what are the core actions that accelerate learning? Looking at number one there, they have implemented a research-based curriculum, as I stated, with integrity. The second point, they collaborated as a team about professional development. They worked specifically closely with our match coach, Katie Glinke. They took a lot of time to learn from other staff and to listen to other staff and also share their experiences. And on the third point, they used all of Illustrative Math's assessments for learning. It's one of the things that they were very diligent about, and they saw the benefits of it, how it impacted student learning and achievement, and shared that with our staff. And the last point there, they did use, as they were talking about, that fluency time to intervene with their students in small groups who needed support. Now, all of this sounds wonderful and sounds easy, but it took a tremendous amount of work on their part and collaboration, not only with each other, but with our staff, our math coach, all year long within there, actually more than a year, going back to when they piloted, so almost 2 years for that to take place. Oops, sorry about that. Is that right, Jason, if I go back on that? There. Thank you. And lastly, I shared the fourth grade team story with our staff on Opening Day Institute this year. And additionally, we introduced District 200's new assessment framework on that day. At the elementary level in District 200, we're focusing on collaboration as an assessment practice. Our fourth grade team, if you look all the aspects underneath that, checks off all of those boxes. Finally, on opening day, we had all of our PLCs reflect on the practices relative to the assessment framework and the fourth grade story that you heard tonight. Again, I have a tremendous staff. I'm so proud and privileged to work with them each and every day. They care deeply about every student who walks through their door, the relationships they have with them, and ultimately their student growth. I want to thank you tonight for having us here and allowing us to host the board meeting and letting us share our story with you tonight. Thank you again.
Thank you. Yeah, awesome presentation. I appreciate you taking the time to be here tonight and sharing your story. I love to see the impact. It's fantastic. So thank you. Thank you very much. All right, board members, any modifications to the agenda? All right, we're moving into public comment. I'm gonna read the little preamble and then we'll go from there. Thank you for taking time to share your feedback and thoughtful focus on our students, school district, and community. It's the board's practice not to directly discuss communication from the community until the context is understood and information explored. It is not our intention to signal a lack of interest, and we appreciate your understanding. Depending on the number of people signed up to speak during public comment, Board Policy 2.230 enables the time per speaker to be reduced from 3 to 2 minutes, allowing more people to share their perspectives. Tonight, we will not have to reduce that time for each speaker. When we meet, it's important that we treat each other with kindness and respect. We set an example for our schools and desire to honor that by being courteous in our public comments. Let's work together to lead with positive intent so that our democratic process reflects the best of our community. To help us follow up if needed, please include your name and if you're a resident of the district. To ensure everyone has a chance to speak, Ms. Kolovitz will raise her hand when 15 seconds remains as a reminder to wrap up your thoughts. At the end of our agreed time, I will respectfully ask you to allow the next speaker to begin. Thank you for investing time to attend the board meeting tonight and share your thoughts and encouragement with our district. We have two comments, or two public people signed up for public comment. First is Tom Halen.
My name is Tom Helen, and I'm a resident of District 200. I'm standing here today to continue my campaign regarding sound pollution and removal of wetland at Wheaton Warrenville South High School. Since the last board meeting, the superintendent scheduled a meeting at Wheaton Warrenville South High School where two neighbors and I attended to discuss the issue at hand. I provided photographic evidence and eyewitness testimony of tree removal in the described area. I was told by the district employees that what we saw and the pictures that we provided were false and that our statements were untrue. I demanded we see the evidence as a group, They reluctantly agreed, and we all walked to the affected area. Upon entering the wetland, I counted out 25 plus freshly cut stumps in front of the district employees before they said that was enough. There's easily 50 in that area. Upon continuing our conversation about resolution, district employees denied that these trees were cut down in front of eyewitnesses and physical proof. The district did agree to perform a sound test. The next day, I filed a FOIA request for all communications and documentation related to my claim. I found that the district employees knew more than 2 trees were cut down prior to the meeting, yet they still denied it to my face, stating that the only possibility is that someone came on the property after hours and cut the trees down without their knowledge. I took off work for that. About a week later, district employees arrived at my home to take sound samples. What took place was not sufficient. A sound specialist came to my property with the 2 employees and took a couple of sound points over a very brief period. During this test, we asked if the unit was running at 100% load to ensure that the sound pollution the neighborhood hears would be properly documented. We were told that they could not guarantee the unit was running at 100% load, but that it is running, and that should be good enough. If you were not going to run the unit at 100%, then why perform the sound test? My neighbors agree that the unit was not as loud as we have previously experienced. Based on my previous experience with the district, I believe the reason 100% load was not confirmed would be to minimize the noise levels as much as possible to potentially mitigate any expense the district may incur due to its actions. I would like a sound test performed while a unit is confirmed to be running at 100% load. An actual sound study should be performed to properly document the impact on the surrounding community, to include nighttime hours and a study over a period of time, as is proper for a sound study. During the sound study, I was told that it is known that more than 2 trees were removed. During the sound, I asked if I was agreeable to replanting the area over the next 2-3 years. I'm open to this, but will not agree to this based on trust, as the district has already lost this. I'm of the opinion that the admission was shared only because I submitted a FOIA request and I knew that this information would come out. I've wasted so much time and energy to make myself and property whole. I assume my local government would do what is right, but at every turn, you've done the opposite. The view of my local government is to do what is easiest for them with no regard to the taxpayer. All this information is documented and easily corroborated. This is not how America is supposed to work. As a veteran of the armed services, I am appalled that my government would treat me or any other citizen in this manner. So I ask, is this what you campaigned on? To run an administration in this fashion?
Thank you. Our next speaker is Bob Stozic.
Good evening. I'm Bob Stozic. I'm a 48-year resident of the school district. And I just have a few comments. I reviewed the minutes of the various meetings of the school board, and I have a couple comments and a couple of questions that I hope might be addressed a little later in presentations that are coming along. I look particularly at the facilities and the finance reports. One was there was an identification of a surplus of like $3.5 million, and one of the things that puzzled me was that among the options for how to deal with that money, one was not to actually spend it on some of the facilities issues that the board has identified many times before. Why wouldn't we spend that money on fixing up some of the problems and issues that we've had for such a long time? That said, since many years ago I raised the issue of adequate funding on a lot of these projects, I was really gratified to see that we're at last at the point where we're adequately funding a lot of these projects and fixing a lot of these problems. And I can see from the plan that that'll continue as the funding continues. But one of the questions I had then, so first, why wouldn't that surplus be spent on some of these projects? The other is, of the projects that are identified in the funding for those, how do those relate to the $40 or so million worth of projects that were identified as critical projects among all the different schools? Is that part of that plan, or are they separate in some way, or how did they relate? And if that could be addressed at some point in this meeting with the presentations, I'd really appreciate it. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Moving on to the superintendent's report. Dr. Schuler, any topics?
Thank you, Mr. Hanlon. I have just a couple things that I want to share with the board. Small list this morning. Number one, and especially as our fourth grade team moves out, I do want to express a thank you to our staff. So end of last year, hey, thank you. We had some major curriculum lifts both last year and into this year. I think you heard a story tonight that just reflects what goes into a major shift and adjustment like that. And on the heels of that, we've begun an ELA implementation, English Language Arts implementation this year. And again, that sits on our teachers to carry that work forward. We're appreciative of it. Just a quick reminder, a week from Friday, we have our first Institute Day of the year. And I know sometimes parents ask question about what happens on those Institute Days. Why do we have professional learning time set aside? What I think you heard this evening in the story really kind of illustrates why there's necessary time to provide training and support for our staff. So just rest assured from the board perspective, we don't have a lot of Institute Days during the year, but Mrs. Murphy and her team and our principals really make effective use of that time to continue to support teachers, especially with some of those major lifts. Second thing I wanted to share tonight, I got a story that Mr. Smith, who works in Mrs. Murphy's department, shared with us. So coming up, we have our annual elected official or municipal partner breakfast, and I just want to share a little story from last year's breakfast. So out of that opportunity last year, you might remember we talked a lot about our pathways work at the high school, and so after that breakfast, the city of Warrenville actually went back and thought about how, as a municipal partner, they could support that work. And so coming up on the 14th, it's this week, we've got 9 seniors from Wheaton, Warrenville South that are spending a day at the municipal building in Warrenville. They're going to shadow members of Warrenville's city staff. These are students that have expressed an interest in government and in that work, and so they're going to have an opportunity to shadow a couple of different people, learn from that experience, and then possibly return back later in the year for a little deeper internship opportunity if they're interested. And so, again, that really all came out of that breakfast where Warrenville reached out to Mr. Smith and said, how could we make this happen? And so it did. So I'm just really thankful for that. Speaking of that, board members, I think you received a calendar invitation to this year's municipal breakfast. It's going to be on Friday, October the 13th. So if you are able to make that, we're going to do it at the Wheaton Park District facility this year. We anticipate probably a little bit bigger group this year, and so we decided to do it at the community center to have a little bit more space to spread out. So please mark your calendars for that. Also want to mention that in your green folders tonight, there's a yellow kind of half sheet of paper. That is a mailer that's going out to our community, I think, as we this week. It's going to go out to our community. It's an invitation to our facility open house opportunities. So I think we've mentioned to the board through the facilities committee, we developed a community engagement plan around our middle school facility projects. We've mapped out 4 opportunities here in the fall for the community to come in and visit those 3 schools, and a virtual opportunity as well. Also want to mention that there's a QR code on the front of this kind of half sheet of paper. If you click on that QR code, it's going to take you to that community engagement site that we've built out to really house all of our documents around the facility improvement needs. You'll also see a video that just went up today that highlights the middle school project's need and kind of the opportunity that sits in front of us. And again, I just want to mention to the board that that site is intended to be kind of a build in progress. So as we continue to develop both individual videos and documents for each school, and as we continue to gather input from the community through some of the feedback tools, that site will continue to build. But that's where we're going to guide the work. What's kind of unique in that site is that in order to participate, you do have to go to the site, sign up for the site. So you do have to provide an email address and a name to engage. We obviously want lots of participation across the district, but I think important to make sure that we know who's engaged and participating with us. So when you have a chance, please take a look. Also wanted to mention that we just finished our State of the Schools video as well. So in the fall, we go around to a number of our other municipal partner groups and do kind of a little State of District 200 schools. And we developed a video to use as an introduction to that this year. So this Friday, I'll be sharing a copy of that video with the board that's actually up on our YouTube channel if you want to take a look at it. It's probably a little bit longer than most of our State of the Schools videos have been. It's about 10 minutes, but it really captures a lot of the really good, amazing work that's happening across the district. So again, thank you to Erica for that. Since the last time that we met, I wanted to mention we did receive notification that the second of the two vaping lawsuits did settle. So I had shared with the board previously that one of the two had settled. District 200's receiving about $280,000 as a result of that first settlement. The second of those two did settle as well. We are expected to receive about $86,000 through the second of those settlements. That's not all going to come in this fiscal year. I think we're expected to receive a little over 50% of that first settlement in this fiscal year. So that 287. Have not seen the details yet on this second settlement, but from what I understand, that one is not going to come in pieces. They've agreed just to pay that in one sum to each of the school districts involved. So we should see that money over this fiscal year potentially as well. In your green folders, there's a copy of some of the pre-conference workshops that board members might be interested in if you're attending the school board conference this year. So please take a look at those. If you've got any questions, let Diana know. If you have any interest in attending any of them, let her know that as well. We'll get you updated. And then final thing that I just wanted to mention, I shared this with the board at the 10-day and the 30-day mark. We do an official enrollment check within the district. Our 10-day enrollment has us at 11,649 students. That's about 25 students shy of where we were last year. What's interesting as you study the enrollment this year is that especially at the kindergarten level, we have the biggest kindergarten class that we've had in 5 years. In the district, we're back up at 845 kindergartners this year. That's about 30 kids beyond your enrollment projection, kind of the most aggressive of your enrollment projections. So I think I've had a few board members just share that they've seen a lot of turnover within respective neighborhoods, younger kids coming in, and we definitely saw that in schools this year. Overall, our elementary enrollment is beyond those Series C projections. It's up. Our middle schools are kind of right where they should be, and our high schools are a little bit more toward the lower end of those projections, and some of that is because of some smaller classes that are coming through the system that are kind of right at the middle school level. So I think we are going to likely start to see soon kind of a rebound or build in those enrollment numbers if this pattern continues to hold true. So just something to watch. I'll certainly update you again after the 30-day mark, but kind of those are the two key points that we look at. Can I answer any questions on any of that? Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Schuler. We're moving the consent agenda portion of our meeting. Normally, we have committee reports at the end, and because there are topics in the consent agendas that touch on some of those items, we're going to have the committee chairs report before we get into that consent agenda. So the first one, the consent agenda, we're going to talk about some capital projects. So I'd like Mr. Paulson to talk about the facilities meeting that.
You want me to do it now?
Yeah, do it now before we go into
Before
we go into it.
By the way, I did promise Mr. Hanlon I would be shorter than the last update.
It's fine.
So the facility committee met last Monday, the 7th, which is really just a kind of a follow-up discussion from August. The meeting minutes are attached. Really, three core topics we discussed. We looked at the capital project priorities for the next 3 summers, so 24, 25, and 26. Just remind the board that I think that's in the packet, or in or in the agenda. That's just kind of a forecast. Need to work on continually aligning the funding every year with the scope that we wanted to be able to tackle for the following summer's work. And of course, priorities are going to shift based on conditions and needs at the time. For example, I think a few board members noted a couple items and some emails that went to Dr. Schuler about the fire alarm system at South and the toilet room accessibility at North. Those are examples of things that kind of became more critical based on situations at the time. So as we do that, we have to kind of, tweak and shift the facility plan. So it's always very dynamic. So in a little bit in the consent agenda, we're going to ask for approval to proceed with the design work for the 24 projects with the expectation to target award of construction contracts in December. I think people also noted that there's no work at Edison, Franklin, or Monroe kind of mocked up or mapped out for the next 3 years until we work through the community engagement process and consider the direction on the middle school facility master plans, which leads to one of the second item that was discussed, which is the kind of the update on the facility master plan process, the community engagement process, including this yellow card and the steps that are going to follow. So I think we expect the process to evolve through this entire school year and most likely into next summer as well. And then finally, kind of policy-related conversation touching back on some questions and comments we had at a previous meeting. We reviewed a proposed update to the capital renewal policy, 4.152, otherwise known as the Sherman-Durgis policy. And I think a draft's going to go to the HR policy committee sometime soon, probably at the next meeting. I think the wording that John and I worked on with the team is probably quite a bit more comprehensive in nature than we've seen previously, including but also maintaining the accountability that we sought to achieve in 2017. We also, as John pointed out, we try to make sure the language was included to try to address the board's desire to increase the budget allocations each year based on some factor, but also recognize we have to stay in line with our board policy 4.10. So that's a balance we're going to have to manage every year. So that's a quick update of what we discussed and is incorporated into the meeting minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Paulson. Board, is there any items that you want removed from the consent agenda? Hearing none. Dr. Schuler, any other updates?
No additional information.
Board, any questions or comments, whether it's this item or the facilities group?
Yeah, question related to the facilities. So regarding the middle schools, the 3 middle schools that don't have any 3-year capital plans outlined here, are there not capital project requirements independent of the potential bigger picture work at the middle schools, things that would have to be done irrespective of what we do with facility enhancements?
As part of the overall master plan we have for the 3 schools, the capital facility work that is laid out on our 10-year capital plan is incorporated into those as a separate scope, separate forecasted budget number. What the master plan does is takes a broader look at the facility needs, to also look at some of the educational realignment of spaces. So that's the idea behind the broader master plan. But yes, our 3 middle schools, those 3 middle schools have significant work that has to get done on the capital side over the period of time.
So in the event that the process becomes delayed as we go through community feedback and other things, is there any of that work that is so critical that it could put us in a position of being underfunded for 2024?
Not for 24. So I think we're okay for next summer. But what I will tell you as we move through this engagement process, if for whatever reason you were to delay the process out another year, I think you're going to have some work that's got to be addressed in 25. So that kind of low version of the plan, that $42 million is capital work at those buildings that is due in the next 3 years, but we're okay for next summer.
Going along with that, just
Go
a
ahead.
comment question. So tonight we are just consenting to the 2024 projects.
Mhm.
Okay.
Correct.
I still will just express concern that overall, all 3 years, that we are exceeding what we have budgeted for 25 and 26. Just concerned where that's going to, or how that's going to play out.
I think it's a fair question. I just want to mention one thing. We have historically done that in the identification of projects. So even though our expectation is that we will spend $7.2 million, it is not uncommon that we will take more projected cost out to bid to see where bids come in. So if you actually look back at our spend, our spend over the last 4 years has never been right on $7.2 million, and that's just a function of where bids came in for that given year. So there were years where we took what we projected to be $7.2, $7.5 million, and the cost actually came in below 7. So we always take a little bit more than that projected 7.2 million out, and then have the ability, even once bids come in, to decide based on how they come in, what are you comfortable spending as a board, and that's really where you're locking in your budget numbers. So the costs at this point are truly projected costs, knowing they have not gone out to bid. They will not come in right on that number.
Is there the potential that any of these costs in the 24 plan would not be fulfilled because of budgetary restrictions?
It is possible, absolutely. So that'll be a decision the board will make when you get the bids back. When the bids go out and they come back, that's the point that you'll make the decision based on where they come in at. And so again, typically the process, when we get those bids back, we've looked at that again with your facility committee first to see where we are, look at what we're comfortable with from a budgetary perspective, look at if we are comfortable digging a little deeper into fund balance if necessary based on the opportunity. So yeah, all you're doing at this point is committing to take this work out for bid. Separate action will be required for you to decide if you're actually going to spend that money. You always have the ability to reject the bid.
Okay, thank you. And then I just agree with Eric that not seeing any of the middle school capital improvement projects that are necessary on here is a little bit concerning, I think. And we are engaging the community. I'm hopeful that it's very clear that there's a good chunk of that project that is something that we cannot not do. Like, there, yeah, thank you.
No, I think that's fair. It's a good question, and we absolutely will do our best to make sure that that is clear and understood.
One other question. In looking at the out years, 25 and 26, while I understand we're not making any commitment to those this evening, are those inflation-adjusted dollars, or is that all based on current dollars?
I'm looking.
They've been adjusted by the architect, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right, let me read the items on the consent agenda. Approval to submit round 1 of the fiscal year 2024 school project maintenance grant, SPMG. Approval of capital projects for summer 2024. Approval of annual vendor contracts generating revenue. Approval of bills payable and payroll. Approval of minutes, August 16, 2023, open, and approval to destroy recordings of closed sessions prior to April 2022 as allowable by law. And approval of personnel report to include employment, resignation, retirement, and leave of absence of administrative, certified, classified, and non-union staff. Board, I need a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as presented.
So motioned.
Moved by Mr. Jerpy,
Second.
second by Mr. Rutledge. Ms. Hutchison, will you please call the roll?
Yes.
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 Yes. All right, we're going to move to the policy posting consent portion of our agenda. There's one policy on the posting agenda, and it's the approval to post revised policy 2.260, uniform grievance procedure for public review and comment. board member, are there any items you want removed from this agenda item? We have to do it, but I don't think there's anything, right? Okay. Let's see. Dr. Schuler, any additional information?
No, but I was going to get over to Mrs. Kolovitz to give the HR Policy Committee meeting, because this item actually came out of the discussion at that committee meeting, so it seems like a good time to update the board on that.
So at our HR policy meeting, Angela and I met on August 31st, and we touched on a lot of things from that were follow-up from our last meeting of action steps that we were taking as a district. And so one of them is we heard feedback that there was confusion and we needed clarity on the uniform grievance process. And so this policy is one step in that. And one of the changes that we made is it said that you may have a form, and we're changing the language to shall request a form, so that there's clarity on when a uniform grievance is followed, because it's a very specific procedure, and when there's just communication with the district. We also, when that form is referenced, are going to hyperlink to the form, and then we're also exploring the possibility of having an online form. So that was one action step taken from our last board meeting, is providing clarity on that grievance process. A second action step that we talked about was training our administrators on the uniform grievance process. So if there's a parent that has a complaint that's not being resolved, they can provide them education on that. So in the district, there's a team called the EC12 team, which is representatives from each building, so our principals, and then also all directors. And so at their meeting, they were trained on the uniform grievance process, so that if complaints get escalated to them, they can provide that information to our families. Third takeaway and action item from last meeting was training on complaint managers on effective and really trauma-informed investigation techniques. So our two complaint managers are Mr. Biskin and Ms. Kuntz, and they sat down with two of our attorneys at Robin Schwartz at the end of August and provided a more individualized training session. Matt talked about this training at our meeting. It was several hours, and they really talked about the principles of investigations to get an objective investigation. So, we have this complaint process that really rests on investigation, that they provided training so that we can have a good investigation. Next action item was training provided to staff and mandated reporters on expectations and the requirements of mandated reporting. So that's always provided every year to staff through an online module, and then we're going to supplement that with some additional training in the building. So the process of how that worked, I understand from Mr. Biskin, is that training was provided to the EC12 team of our principals and directors, and then they're going to carry that message out in each of the buildings. Next action step is finalizing and implementing administrative procedures to support faith's law requirements. So the consortium of press, which we talked about at our last meeting, that has lawyers from several different school law firms and administrators from various districts, large and small, that develop these model policies that districts can follow. They also develop our administrative procedures, and so we expect that some additional procedures in light of faith law are going to be coming from that consortium. So we'll look at those, since that we know our comparator districts follow those. And then we also had a discussion on fingerprinting for volunteers and when that's required. In addition to the action steps from last meeting, we also talked about the high school ambassadors. That policy is part of what we'll be approving tonight. And the applications for that are already open, and they're going to be closing in 2 days. So if anyone has an interested high schooler, now is the time. We also talked about a process for the HR Policy Committee to review our administrative procedures. So they're organized by sections that kind of mirror the sections of our policies, and so we're going to go through them throughout the year, section by section, and review them. So did I forget anything?
I think that sounds great. One question that you triggered that I don't think we asked at the committee meeting that I want to make sure I don't forget and gets lost. So I think we've done a nice job of looking at training for administration to offer a uniform grievance process to a parent. What happens in the case of are we doing the same sort of training amongst staff who might want to file a uniform grievance? Like, how would they know that that's an available option?
Yeah. So in guess I would, in most cases, if staff member has a concern, they're either registering the concern with one of our complaint managers at the district level or through their building principals. So again, I think the training for building administrators was on how to guide somebody to that process if the complaint is unresolved. I think that would apply the same for staff as it would for parents. So the training was really more in helping our administrators understand how to guide somebody to that process if they're getting to a point where clearly the concern's not been resolved at the local level.
Okay. Do staff know that that option is available to them if they were?
We can certainly make sure that that they can. I mean, we've had grievances filed by staff in the
Right.
past, so I would assume that yes, that's the case, but we can absolutely make sure.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Julie.
Any other questions or comments from board members? Eric?
This actually may be more for Dr. Schuler based upon the committee report. The first is relative to uniform grievance policy and procedure compliance. Given some of the complexity with different milestones and specific timelines, does the district have the resources to effectively monitor compliance, or is help needed in that regard?
Compliance just in terms of hitting like the required dates and that piece, I believe that we do. What I would say to you is that as with any complaint management process, it depends on the complexity and the volume of complaints that we're responding to at any given point in time. We have the ability to do one of two things: to either assign an internal complaint manager to handle and manage the investigation, or to assign it to an outside complaint manager to assist. Again, we've done both, sometimes depending on the situation and sometimes depending on the volume. So yes, I believe we will have the capacity to manage it on a day-to-day basis. I think if we're in a situation where we're finding there's just a heavier volume than usual, we have the ability to outsource some of that support.
Thank you. And then second question, with regard to the fingerprinting, love the clarification of expectations. Obviously, we need to put safety first. As we're doing that, just a procedural suggestion is getting word out to PTA presidents and others that bring in large volumes of volunteers. Those volunteers do great work and would hate for people to be surprised by an additional step that they need to take to volunteer, such that it diminishes their ability to engage with the schools.
We met with PTA Council on Monday, and actually Dr. Salagi reviewed the fingerprint expectations with PTA Council so that they can make sure it's distributed through their channels as well. A lot of our buildings were represented at that meeting, but yeah, we had the same thought for sure.
Any other questions or comments?
Just a quick comment on not really the proposed policy, but the form. A couple things that I thought could be helpful for the group to consider. It's a pretty simple form. I thought if we had a entry for the requested resolution, in other words, not just what the complaint is, but what's the requested resolution. And then also maybe the opportunity to enter the steps taken prior to submitting the form. I think it's important that whomever's completing the form and filing the grievance articulate the process they've been through previously to help kind of inform the process. So those are just two things that I think I asked the committee to consider, or the administration to consider. I think they would be an enhancement to the form, not the policy.
Understood.
We can talk about that at our next meeting, and that brings up just something else that I wanted to mention is that with all this discussion on the uniform grievance, that I don't want to lose sight that this is a specific process of all of the other mechanisms that exist to just help solve problems. You know, talking to a teacher, talking to a principal, talking to a superintendent. Right on our website, if there's a safety concern, it's so easy to file that. And so I just don't want to create the impression that this is the only way to solve problems.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, board, I need a motion and a second to approve the policy posting consent agenda as presented.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Paulson,
Second.
second by Mr. Long. Ms. Hutchinson, will you please call the roll?
Yes.
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 Yes. All right, we're moving on to policy approval consent agenda. So the following policy numbers are listed for approval tonight. Revised Policy 2.170, Revised Policy 4.45, Revised Policy 4.100, Revised Policy 5.230, Revised Policy 7.305, Revised Policy 2.150, and Proposed New Policy 2.180. Board, are there any items members want removed from the policy approval consent agenda? Hearing none. Dr. Schuler, any additional information?
No additional information. We did not receive any comment on those that are posted for approval this evening.
Thank you. Board, any questions?
I have a question on just the numbering of the high school student ambassadors. I know that's a local policy. Don't our local policies typically end in 2?
Yeah,
Or is-
I actually numbered that consistent with other districts that I've seen that have a similar high school student ambassador policy. They all have it anchored in that spot in the manual, so that's actually why I picked that in terms of the numbering.
I just remember that coming up in a
Right.
communication recently. It's not important, not an important question.
All questions are important, Brad.
Some are more important.
There
That's
you
not
go.
one of them.
Any other questions from board? All right. Board, I need a motion and a second to approve the policy approval consent agenda as presented.
So motion. We'll fight over it.
Moved by Mr. Jerpy, seconded by Mr. Rutledge. Ms. Hutchison, will you please call the roll?
Yes.
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 Yes. All right, board, we have one action item tonight, and it's the approval of resolution to adopt the 2023-2024 budget. Dr. Schuler, do you want to introduce the topic?
I will. So Dr. O'Keefe is going to just give you a quick reminder of kind of where we are here in the final step of the budget process. Your finance committee reviewed a lot of this information as a part of their recent committee. So I think Dr. O'Keefe will let the finance committee kind of weigh in at the end too and offer any thoughts. That wasn't the only thing finance committee did. So we will come back to one other topic under the regular report tonight as well. But I'm going to kick it over to Dr. O'Keefe to give the introduction.
Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Schuler. So it is the time statutorily that we are required to pass a budget. Just a reminder of the process that we go through on an annual basis. We ask you to approve a resolution to begin the budget in January of each year. We bring to you a tentative budget in July. That tentative budget is posted for 30 days as required by law. We then hold a public hearing as required by law in August, which is at least 30 days after the tentative budget has been posted, and then we have to ask you to approve the final budget no later than September 30th of each year. So tonight is just a quick recap of some of the major things that we looked at. I'm not going to go through every single number in here. I'll just talk about themes in general. So on the education fund side, and it's important to point out, no changes in what we originally planned for in terms of the tax levy. As a reminder, for the 2023 tax levy, that's based on CPI from December of 2022, which was at 6.5%. So beyond the statutory limit, the PTEL, the tax cap limit specifically, so we are not able to access the 6.5. We are only able to access up to 5%, and we have accessed all 5% to ensure that we can bring you a balanced budget, but no changes from the tentative budget in that world. One bit of information that did come through after the tentative budget was posted is the state of Illinois, and specifically the Department of Revenue, let us know that they had severely overestimated taxes being paid in calendar year 2021, and those funds had already gone out to all public entities related to that specific year. So they are required to claw back about $800 million throughout the state, and they are specifically pulling that out of CPPRT. So our portion of it is a little bit more than $1 million, but this is, and every single year we run into it, the Department of Revenue is doing nothing more than estimating what those revenues are going to be. Those estimates obviously are not perfect every single year, and they're based on income tax earned as a whole, from a personal perspective and from a corporation perspective. So it's probably not fair to think that they would know exactly what that's going to be every year, but I can tell you the last 4 fiscal years, they haven't been close. So what we anticipate is at least $1 million. We've pegged $1 million. We've actually received year to date more than we received last year. So we expect that the clawback is going to happen between now and the end of the year. Another big item that happened and approved by the city council back in July. So TIF number 3 in Wheaton is the last TIF remaining in downtown Wheaton. That's the courthouse project in that area. The city has a pretty significant surplus sitting in those TIF dollars. The city council approved a total payment of $3 million in surplus out to the local taxing bodies. We are the biggest portion of that. We're roughly 2/3 of it, which is why we're using the $2 million number. We don't know what that exact final number is. The process has begun, as I mentioned. City council approves it. It goes off to DuPage County to verify. They determine exactly what each taxing body is set to receive. That information goes back to the city, and then I'm told the city is actually going to cut checks to each of the taxing bodies. I've asked my counterpart at the city of Wheaton to let me know that when that's going to happen, so I can go pick up the check and take it to the bank. A few other areas as a whole, interest earnings throughout, you'll see, and there's a little recap at the end. We've had some pretty fantastic first couple months of the fiscal year in terms of interest earnings, and based on Fed data, it looks like we're going to be fairly consistent and maybe not reach anywhere below 4.5% in terms of interest rates by the end of the year. We're currently at more than 5.5% as a whole, so we've been a little conservative in what that would look like, but we did increase that compared to the tentative budget. And a few other pieces on the ed fund, which is our biggest fund side of things. I was $11,000 off in my guess of evidence-based funding, so we're going to receive $11,000 less, but as you'll see, we didn't need to use EBF to support Fund 20 and Fund 40 like we have in the past. So the net effect is just about $11,000, but it's a small reduction in the overall aggregate, and we took it out of, while we increased specifically Fund 10, it's not to the point that it would have been if our estimates were perfectly accurate. And then final two last pieces here, specifically special ed private facility, that's a reimbursement model. And it's difficult to actually plan out what those reimbursements are going to be. So we use historical data, and most recently our previous fiscal year. As it turns out, the first payment that we received in this new fiscal year was greater than anticipated. That was vouchered and paid for by the comptroller's office, which is why that was adjustment was made. And then we looked at all updates to our state and federal grants and made sure that the anticipated revenues coming in met the anticipated expenditures going out. On the revenue side, and this is a yearly process for us, and the biggest difference is when we're estimating salaries, which is our biggest piece, in the late spring, early summer, before presenting the tentative budget. Lots of unfilled positions, lots of unknowns. So we've actually built in what we anticipate on the salary side if we were to hire every single person within the district. So that's probably greater than what we will end up being at, but that's how we budget. We decreased our benefits budgets by slightly more than $1 million, and the rationale behind that is when we bring you the tentative budget, the full expected increase we actually put on your shoulders in the tentative budget, and then when we go back for the final budget, we look at what's the difference between your board paid percentage and then those contributing to the plans, and on average it's about 80-20, so we're able to claw back a little bit more than $1 million on that side. We looked at our professional services, supplies, capital equipment, and you see those other areas too. Nothing significant in terms of the overall budget, but we look at every line item between the end of when the tentative budget is posted and go specifically to what we anticipate that final budget needs to look like. In Fund 20, a little bit on the interest earnings side, we did increase what is described as other revenue. We actually got FEMA dollars back for work that had happened during the pandemic, a little bit less than $40,000, plus some other refunds that we weren't anticipating coming in, so that's why that adjustment was made. You see, we reduced EBF, we didn't need it. Little change in salaries and benefits. There was an increase on the telephone side of things, so that's a one-time expense related to all of our new equipment this year that wasn't captured in the tentative budget. A small change in supplies, and then the other big piece on Fund 20 that we originally talked about is we had split on the capital expenditure side of things, paying for the LLCs and paying for the rest of our capital projects between Fund 20 and Fund 60. so the O&M fund and the capital projects fund, but we've moved all of that to Fund 60, so we don't need to specifically have that significant capital outlay in Fund 20. Fund 30, a little bit of interest earnings, and I'll give a sneak peek to Mr. Long. This is that conversation on the comment that was made tonight, where we can talk about specifically where fund balances may be in terms of the debt service fund, and also what we were able to do by law with that fund balance. Transportation, same thing, a little bit of interest. The state transportation reimbursement for the prior year is not due to ISB until August 15th. So what we put in the tentative budget is an estimate of based on what was received in the prior fiscal year. We actually had a greater submission for reimbursements. So we've updated that to what we expect to receive from ISB this year, which allowed us to claw back the evidence-based funding side of things and a few other small specific items. One thing that I'll mention at the end too, in our contracts with both Sunrise and specifically Illinois Central, we do have a gas escalator clause in there, and just based on our first couple payments and where gas prices are at on the diesel side of things, we increased that just to make sure that we've got the appropriate budget for it. Quick recaps in 50, 60, and 70. So IMRF adjusts based on salaries, adjusting specifically for classified staff. We did not have yet the revenue projected specifically for that LLC grant from the state of Illinois for Clifford Johnson Elementary School. And then we pulled everything back into Fund 60 to pay for all of our capital projects out of there. And then working cash as a whole, it has the biggest significant increase in anticipated interest earnings. Just one quick little recap on the interest earnings side. So our tentative budget was at $1.3 million. We're at about $1.7 million now projected. And based on our first couple months, we would actually exceed that if we projected out the whole year. And then in total, this is the important number for us collectively, we are responsible, and your board policy states we must bring a balanced budget to you. So about $209.5 million in revenues. And again, this is on the operating side, so this is not debt services. This is not capital projects. So slightly more than $200 million in expenditures, which leaves an operating balance of about $9.2 million. That does not include transferring out $6 million out of Fund 20 into capital projects to pay for our capital projects. In the state budget form, it's not considered an expense, so we don't include it as an expense on the operating side, leaving us with a projected surplus of about $3.25 million. And if you just think about two simple things to look where that surplus comes from, TIF reimbursement, number 3, from the city of Wheaton is $2 million, and interest income out of Fund 70, your piggy bank, the working cash fund, is $1.25 million. That specifically defines your surplus, which means the rest of the budget is beautifully, from my perspective, balanced, and I think we're in a great place. Mr. Long, would you like to give a recap if whatever I missed from Finance Committee, and then we can certainly bring up the conversation I know you're excited to discuss?
Sure, thank you. Thanks for all the work on the budget. We met on August 30th. I'm not going to add anything on the budget. It's all in the, that was most of what we discussed at the meeting, but it's all in these documents and covered last month. We also talked about the finance one-page communication, just the highlights of that. We took out redundant items that were also in the facilities one page, so there was a little bit of a cleanup there. We really like, there's a text portion overview on page 1, which is a little different. In the past, it's primarily been charts and some bullet points, so there's a little bit of a overview, which is good. And then we also talked about incorporating or ways we can educate the community about levy guidelines and how the levy works and CPI and spend levels and so forth. The other things we talked about, we reviewed a cost per pupil comparison for the past 3 fiscal years for District 200 and our comparative districts. There's been a little bit of noise in those years, primarily because of the ESSER funding. We also talked about the use of the cash basis of accounting, which is what we do. Many districts do accrual basis. The primary driver to do that is a recognition, and I can't remember what the
ASBO International Meritorious Budget Award.
which is something we haven't applied for and something we don't really feel is necessary. The we do accrual for the audit. To switch our monthly reporting to accrual, it would really just be it'd be complex, and it's just there's no real value in it. So we decided that's the way we're going to stick with it. And kind of piggybacking on when this was discussed a few years ago with previous board member Mr. Matheson, who was much more knowledgeable on educational finance than I am, and came along to the same to that conclusion. We talked about staffing FTEs, which we'll see tonight in the HR update, and then some of the contracts exceeding 25,000. And regarding the abatement of the surplus that's going to exist in the debt service fund as we pay off debts, it's estimated that that's going to be $3.5 million, and it's really driven by two things. The county actually assesses a little bit more than what's in our levy each year, so they collect that plus the interest earnings. So those are the drivers for why that surplus exists. It's it's our belief that those monies were borrowed at a time for a very specific purpose, and so we really feel that the best thing to do is return that money to the community, and that's why we're suggesting an abatement. And we're not abating the whole thing because the payoff isn't going to be for a couple more years, and we want to wait till those figures are finalized till we decide what to do with the final piece. We do have the ability to bring that money back in through claiming the interest earnings, and there was one other vehicle, but and even to the point that was made in public comment, we recognize that, but with the middle school, we're going to be doing something to fund that, and it depends on where that comes, but we have the ability to borrow money. We have borrowing capacity that we can do on a limited basis, so we'd rather separate those two. This is for the projects that happened many years ago, and we just feel like that's the best way to handle that. And then the final thing is just important to note that the work of prior boards did, we restructured the debt in 4 phases, and that reduced the amount of interest and bond payments by $10 million over the life of these bonds. So I think it's important to recognize that work. That's it.
Any other questions or comments from
John
board
Hibbs.
members? Ms. Rutledge?
Just to clarify, we're doing all this on a cash basis, is what we pay our bills with is cash, but for the annual audit, it's done on an accrual basis?
That's correct.
Yeah,
That's correct.
Sounds fine to me.
Which means any July and August revenues and expenditures that rightly belonged inside of the previous fiscal year all get pulled back.
Everything gets adjusted back into. Do you have a sense of the increase in percentage-wise of new construction in the equalized assessed valuation?
Not yet. So we're in our quadrennial. So we're in the 4-year time frame, and the county assessors have told us, hold please. They're still processing a ton of information. I expect to get that at some point in October. In the levy as of now, we've estimated $30 million, but we should get much finer details from both of our multiple township assessors here, I hope, in the next 30 to 45 days. That way, when we have the public hearing in November for the tax levy, because our operating side will be over 5%, we'll require to have a truth and taxation hearing. I should have more definitive details for you at that point.
I'm not concerned with the change of assessed values of existing properties. It's all the new construction that adds to the base that could be taxed that wasn't taxed last year.
Correct.
And that's I think the key thing there that offsets the increase in the levy.
Yeah, we being all of us in our comparables are constantly writing our township assessors to get the information as soon as possible. This year's just a little bit later just because of the full reassessment throughout the whole county.
Good. Thank you.
Any other questions from board members?
I have a question on the budget. So in the slides you went through for each fund, what the big items were that changed from last year. Proportionally, are our funds still the same as they were last year? So of our expenses, are we still spending the same proportion in our education fund?
My quick, without specifically looking at it, the education fund is the biggest fund that we have all of our expenditures out. The operating increase is about, hold on. I'll tell you, but this will be based on budget to budget, not actual last year, since we're not done with the audit yet. Revenues in Fund 10 are up 6.41%, while expenditures are up 5.22%, at least budget to budget. Which is, both of those are in line with right where CPI was, and certainly with updates on our new obligations with the WWEA and the CEA.
Just one thing, that the changes that he was highlighting today are changes from the preliminary budget to the final budget, not from last year to this year.
Yep. So these are changes from July when we presented the tentative budget.
Board members, any other questions?
Just two. Thank you, Brian. Is there a point at which we're going to decide on which option to choose for the surplus proceeds? But not right now.
We don't need to now. So that'll be a conversation during, we've brought it up. We will more than likely bring it up again next month. And then when we get into specifically the truth and taxation hearing, we'll have to make a final decision no later than November on where we're going, so that I can update and make sure that we've got the appropriate resolutions if we are going to do an abatement when we ask you to approve the tax levy in December.
Okay, thank you. And then going back to your presentation, can you just review again? So these are the changes that have been made since July?
Correct.
Okay, so on, I guess, page 2 or 3, the decrease in benefits, can you just explain that
Sure.
one more time?
So when we put together, so this is my philosophy. When we put together a tentative budget and we look at overall benefit costs. So our benefits program actually run from September 1st through August 31st. So there's 2 months out of the year at one specific cost, and then 10 months at another cost. On average, your benefit packages between PPO and HMO increased 10%. It was actually 13% on the PPO, 8% on the HMO side of things. What I did is just take a blend and charge all 10% to you when we were estimating the tentative budget for these costs in July. So I knew exactly where our operating budget stood and whether or not we're going to have any significant issues. You don't pay 100% of the increase. That increase is split between you and those of us that are employees. So what we did was we clawed back the portion that really is employee paid portion. So it's 80% board on average, not everything perfectly, but 80% board, 20% employee, and then we were able to make those adjustments because this budget line item in and of itself is about $25 million for medical dental benefits.
Okay, that was helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, just one, I guess, question, probably not for tonight, but for the future. My understanding is that abating a levy is different than under levying, depending on the timing of it, and that there's implications down the road. So when we get to that conversation, I think it's important that you explain to the board, you know, what the difference is.
Yeah, and that will be a little bit different with the debt service fund because that is purely based on what is due in the debt service fund. That we might run into that if we were to under levy in operating funds, but yes.
Thank you. All right, board members, I need a motion and a second to approve the resolution to adopt the final 2023-2024 budget as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Paulson, seconded by Mrs. Kulovitz. Ms. Hutchison, will you please call the roll?
Yes.
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 Yes. Moving on to oral reports, we have one oral report tonight on the agenda, the Vision 2026 Human Resources Update. Dr. Schuler?
Yeah, so Mr. Biskin's going to make his way up to the podium and share with the board. We've typically brought your HR update now in September because we are, for the most part, through the bulk of our hiring season, and so he's going to share with you just some details on our hiring season, some of the goals that you put in place last year and outcomes we saw and some of the challenges we saw this year. So go ahead, Mr. Biscuit.
Thank you. In the 40-plus days or so I've been on this job, I've had the pleasure to work with some great people in our district, specifically in our HR. Ms. Kuntz and her staff do an outstanding job. They work incredibly hard. So a lot of this goes to them. They do the work of having to process people and get people ready to be able to work in our school system. So specifically HR, this is our focus, to hire, develop, and retain diverse, high-quality staff. And then we go about that in several different ways. Some of them actively recruit a diverse pool of candidates. We try to maintain competitive wages, try to proactively address staff shortage and workforce needs. We implemented a Grow Your Own Teacher career pathway, and then we actively support dual credit certification for secondary teachers. Sort of some hard data right now. From last year, 22-23, we hired a total of 563 staff. That includes teachers, support staff, admin, summer rec, and summer school personnel. We hired 92 guest teachers. We processed 357 resignations, processed 968 employee assignment changes, and that encompasses anything, whether somebody goes on a leave, they resign, they retire, they have a change in job status, whatever that is. Processed 202 leaves of absences, and we coordinated 169 student teachers and observation placements. And when I look at that, I think that's a proactive measure on our part to try to work with student teachers, so perhaps we can form a connection with them so when they're certified, they'll want to come teach in one of our schools. We processed 338 graduate coursework lane changes. We processed 617 micro credentials. Last year and the year before, those were stacks where they had to take 3 in order to get the compensation. We recognize 106 service award recipients. I think it's a credit to our district. We have a lot of people who do stay. We responded to 82 FOIA requests, and we processed 232 permissive transfers of students within our district. There was something that was implemented last year in full, and that is interview stream. This helps us get to know our candidates a little bit more before they get in front of us. They're asked 3 questions, and it's an online process. How did you choose your field of study? Describe the teacher or professor that has created the most beneficial learning experiences for you, and what is your ultimate educational goal? There's some benefits to us being able to utilize this kind of a platform. We have the opportunity to hear more about the candidates earlier in the process, and we can identify some of their skills before they get to us. It eliminates phone call screening. It allows the team to be more efficient with their time. I can say that it does allow you, as someone who's going to hire, you can watch that at your own time rather than having to schedule that. It's an ability to share candidates with other stakeholders that they might have a need where that candidate is looking. And then it expanded to the admin candidates this past school year, and I can attest to that because I had to answer those questions as well as I interviewed for this job. There is a new part that I thought this would be a good place to put it. We have a new teacher mentor program. The purpose and goal, the purpose of the mentor program is to provide support to teachers new to our district during their first year. Mentors that are assigned to them will assist new teachers to adapt to their school climate, culture. They also guide new teachers in the various aspects that are related not only to their specific grade level, but just overall the challenges of teaching in a new school, in a new district that first year. And there are topics that are specific to the grade levels, as I stated. This is a program that we hope will capture our first year staff and make them more accustomed to what we do here, what we stand for, and how we work. We think it's a much more intentional effort to try to make sure that those teachers that are new to our district are connected, and I think it will go a long, long way. Staffing, you can see the trends We have certified, non-certified, and admin. As you can see in 2024, we are in the process of normalizing the FTE based on the enrollment needs throughout the district, and we are on that path. We had retirements in the 22-23 school year from a certified staff standpoint. We had 20. Non-certified, we had 25, and admin, we did not have any. Tactic 1, as stated in the second slide, actively recruit a diverse pool of candidates. This continues to be a challenge for us, not only for us, but for every district out there. There are less teaching candidates overall to choose from, but we continue to make efforts to try to connect with as many as we possibly can. I think some of the efforts we've made this last school year will benefit that, and I'll talk a little bit about that now. One of those is we successfully negotiated a 4-year WWEA contract. We think we can help retain and attract diverse, high-quality candidates with this new agreement. We reopened the CEA contract to recategorize and increase hourly rates and stipends for staff that support high-need programs. So this is an effort that I think will go a long way toward retaining and attracting diverse, high-quality candidates. Tactic number 3, proactively address staffing shortages and workforce needs. We are what we did last year, and we continue to do these things. We're posting all open spots on Indeed, online, and the CUSD200 website. We continue to utilize social media platforms to get the word out about open jobs. We will continue to attend job fairs as best as we possibly can, and we're going to continue to work with contracting out hard-to-fill certified and non-certified spots. I will tell you that even from that standpoint, working with having to contract out some of the high-needs areas, it is challenging for those agencies also, just to get bodies in to place those people within various schools. That goes into the challenges that we've had not only last year, but we've had this year. These are some areas that we continue to focus on and try to recruit and attract high-quality people and then keep them. Special ed teaching assistants, psychologists, guest teachers, special ed teachers, bilingual teachers, supervisors for our lunchrooms, secretarial and clerical support staff, and then student supervisors. These are areas that we continue to struggle with trying to find people, but we have made many gains. Like in terms of psychs, last year, 22-23, I believe we were 5 down to start the school year. This year, we were only down 1, and we've now filled that. So we are making gains toward these hiring challenges. Tactic 4, implement a grow your own teacher career pathway. These are the current numbers for this year, 3 sections of introduction to teaching. There's a section at South, 2 at North, 72 students total, 93 staff requested to be mentors. I think there's a strong desire for our current staff to want to help those students that have an interest in wanting to get into the profession of teaching. As you can see, they are exposed to various experiences that will help them decide if this is something they want to continue to do. And we had last year 36 seniors that said that they intended to pursue this. And then, as I've stated in the past, and it does get a laugh, but there were some that found out that they didn't want to do this. And that is an important thing too. Tactic 5, actively support dual credit certification for secondary teachers. Dual credit is an area that we want to continue to strengthen, to offer that opportunity for our high school students to be able to earn not just high school credit, but college credit with certain courses. We are working with College of DuPage on a continuous basis. Core academic courses as of now, they need a master's in the subject area or any master's degree and 18 hours in the subject area. Teachers can begin teaching a dual credit course after 9 hours as long as they pursue the 18 credits. Non-core courses, bachelor's degree with a combination of teaching and work experience in the subject area. And we have a subcommittee right now with WWEA that's working on how can we support each other in making dual credit opportunities happen for our students. One thing that is out of our control is how the colleges respond to certain things, and they may change the requirements for high school teachers to be able to teach dual credit. We don't have any control over that. We just have to adjust if those requirements do change. So once again, that's our focus, that's our goal. We continue to work on these, and they are talked about and worked on a daily basis. Any questions?
Any other questions from board members?
We do have a couple questions on the Grow Your Own. The 36 students, how many took the class last year?
Not.
It's okay.
I don't have that full number. All I know is
63. I think it's 63.
63.
yeah.
Okay.
And then the second question
67, sorry.
is there a way to identify students who might not have taken the class who are education majors? Right, so there's 36 kids that are majoring in education that took
Right.
the class. I would guess there's other kids that graduated that are also majoring in education, and wouldn't we want to try to recruit that, I don't know, it's just a random thought.
Yeah, because there will be some students that don't take this course at North or at South that go on to college and they figure out a year or two later that this is something that they want. We are working right now to try to create a structure to keep in contact with those students that are going to pursue this after they leave us. But that's a great point, to try to offer some bridge for those students that perhaps didn't take the course but are going to decide to major in this later.
Just a random thought.
Yeah, I like that.
Mr. Chirpy?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the presentation. And I mean, it's very impressive, the balance between just the massive amount of administrative HR activity, those that are focused on building new capabilities and those that are focused on people and talent development. So it's great overview. I had one very tactical question. Permissive transfers. Do you have a sense for the rough breakdown of like top drivers behind permissive transfers?
I don't have that by level. What I've seen in the ones that I have worked with for this upcoming school year, many of them are people that have moved out of different areas. Some may not have a program that they need in terms of special education. Some of it is there is family need, and they are, that's something that is unique to each of the families, but those are sort of the drivers that I've seen for this year.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess a broader question, and if this isn't something you can answer tonight, I understand. Looking at the staffing head counts and then kind of responding to some of the chatter in the broader school community around class sizes, and just from some discussions I've pieced together with various folks in the administration, I feel like the narrative behind that is essentially that class sizes in terms of number of students in a classroom may be larger, but from a ratio of staff to students, we're actually favorable because we have increasing situations where you may have multiple certified teachers and or support staff serving the same classroom. Is that a fair read on what's going on?
Yeah, that is. We have worked to try to make sure that the amount of FTE we have in the district is equal to the needs of our students. During COVID, we obviously bumped up in some areas, but I think what you just said would answer that. Yeah.
And is there a marked change this year driven by demographics, or is it just that the community is seeing a trend that's been going on for a few years now?
You talking about a marked trend in terms of the class size element, or?
This notion of having to bring in FTEs into the classroom to support the varying needs, so that you have, again, this favorable FTE ratio, but potentially larger absolute numbers in the classroom.
I think there have been a few sort of demographic shifts in that. So I guess two in particular that I would highlight. Certainly one is in the multilingual space. We have seen significant shift, not just in the number of multilingual students that's increased, but the number of what are classified as newcomer students that carry a much higher degree of service need within the school. We've seen a marked shift in that. I think we actually shared that with the board maybe a year ago, and that trend didn't change this year. I think we've also seen a shift in the intensity of need in some of our special education programs as well that has caused a shift in resources. So there's a little bit of the support function inside of the classroom, and then a little bit of just the reallocation of staff to also make sure we're supporting really what we would characterize as like our tier 3 needs, kind of our highest need of support.
Has there been much feedback from the staff community around how that's working on a day-to-day basis in terms of that more team-based effort to serve a classroom?
Yeah, so one, just what you're talking about in terms of like class size and ratio, we have an understanding or an agreement that we review that data and information with our association every year, and that's really how we've gone through the discussion to look at how that support is happening. The reality is that when you get into a class size discussion, it impacts people in a different way, right? There is a practical reality that there's a year where you're teaching at a grade level or a section where the numbers are a little higher, and there's a year that you happen to have a little reprieve because numbers are lower, so it doesn't impact everybody the same. And also, the just the composition of the class can make a big difference. So it's not simply about numbers; it's also about the kind of time, attention, energy, and support that's needed. So a class of 22 kids can be significantly more challenging for a teacher or teachers that are inside of there than perhaps a class of 27, 28. I think when we talk, though, especially about ratio, and I think that would be a great thing for us to bring back to you just so you can see it as a board, because Dr. Salagi, especially at the elementary building. So when we talk about ratios, too, we really separate out like the highest need kind of special education staff, and you're really looking about who are the students that are or who are the teachers that are supporting students during those core academic blocks. So, we still maintain pretty significant staff allocated to PACE. That's pulling students out during that block and actually reducing what may be a class size of 26 students down to could be 24, 23, 22, right, during that window of time. Same really with the reading and math piece. But I think it'd be easier to visualize if we just brought that back to you and showed you what that looks like, and show you both now and what it was in 2019.
Perfect. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions from board?
I have a few questions. On the student teachers, you mentioned that was a recruitment strategy. How many student teachers typically are hired, stay on as teachers?
Do we have data saying how many student teachers
Yeah.
had their student teaching experience in our district, and then if we hire them?
Mm-hmm.
I don't have that.
Okay.
I can get that for you, though.
Can't remember all my questions. On the tactic number 1 of actively recruiting a diverse pool of candidates, I know that's an area that has been a struggle you mentioned. What tactics have we done, and what tactics, because it has been a struggle, haven't we done yet that we could think of?
Could you repeat that first part? I'm sorry.
The tactic number 1 of actively recruiting a diverse pool of candidates, what strategies have we done and what haven't we done that we can consider?
Well, we have physically gone to job fairs. That's what I know. We've done that in the past, and I think we'll continue to do that. But I think we will probably try to go to job fairs of colleges that have a student body that are similar to the ones that we have, so we can try to meet the needs of all of our students. I think we're maybe more targeted in where we go to the job fairs, and I think that might go a long way. It's it's not an excuse, it's just the reality that right now there are less teaching candidates overall. But we have increased our pay. I believe the culture of our district, if we can get prospective teachers and staff in the buildings, I think it'll go a long way toward trying to secure diverse, high-quality staff.
And that tactic, is that something that we would consider for where we have relationships for student teachers as well?
Yes, yes.
Ms. Blattner?
Actually, on that same tactic, so in looking at this, I realized that I have failed to verbalize this in the past, so I'm kind of just throwing it out there now. I wish that when we say diverse, we did not only limit that to race. Like I can think of, do we target candidates with disabilities, physical or otherwise, different education levels, perhaps cultural background rather than just racial background. And even perhaps like the education training program that they came from. I think if we expanded our idea of diversity, it could only benefit our students.
And I agree with you 100%. This reporting tool is based on that, but that vision of what we're looking for, you just captured all of it. We are looking for people that have different backgrounds, experiences. Where did they go to school? What kind of program did they go through? We're trying to look at all of that.
Right. But we only
we report this out, though. Yes.
Part of that is this is what's reported on our state report card for the district as well. So I think what is put out there by the state, certainly for the community to absorb and see, is the demographic information you see there. But there are, we certainly, I think your point is a valid one, right? That at the end of the day, I think as principals are seeking to hire staff in their building, they're often looking at a much bigger picture in terms of kind of what their needs are to provide the right, certainly environment, learning community within their school, and that probably has a broader definition of diversity. But this is what's publicly reported, and this is how the state certainly reports data on school districts.
Okay, thank you. Two more things. When we look at the page just previous to that, we've increased by 3 administrators since 2021. I'm not super clear on if I remember.
Yep,
where that
two of them are in Melissa's department, so we added back in your director of instruction, 2 of your directors of instruction. One is in the special education realm, and we didn't actually add a person this year. We reclassified somebody that was a student support specialist into an administrative position for
Okay.
this year.
I think I did see that now that you say that, so thank you. I think I have forgotten my third question, so thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Rutledge?
I was just looking at the number of resignations and the number of assignment changes in proportion to the total employment base, and it just seems like those numbers are high. If I'm reading this right, something over half of the staff had an assignment change and 20% have resigned. Is that
Well, some of that, a lot of that, like our guest teachers, our sub teachers, those are at will employees. So those aren't guaranteed hiring for the next year. They go through all of that. So that's part of those numbers too. That's pretty high.
part of the resignations?
Yeah.
or the-
So and then the 968 employee assignment changes, that is for any change in assignment. So if that is someone that is, let's say that's a coach who's a full-time teacher, now they're doing a summer rec, they're working that, they now sign on for that. So it's any change within the district.
Thank you.
Following up on Mr. Rutledge's question, do we internally classify resignations as regrettable or non-regrettable turnover so that we understand if we're retaining the employees that we most want to?
I don't have that answer, but I will get that for you.
There is, so two things I'll mention. One, there's a retention rate that goes onto our report card. We have looked at that every year to separate out certainly like those that are due to retirement from those that are leaving for another reason that we wish to have avoided.
Mr. Paulson?
All right, yeah, two quick comments. I know that teacher shortage, attracting teachers is a pervasive issue across education. I would like us to consider kind of take a business mindset, something that could be developed to create some kind of incentive program for our student teachers who come in here, the graduates of our high schools where they went through the career pathway program or just went into education, to return to the district as a teacher. I think it would be a unique possible strategy if we had something that tried a different tool to not only hire but to attract people who are from or worked in our district. That's obviously future consideration. And then I was going to bring this up in the FOIA request later, but we talked about 82 FOIA requests this year. Any concept, feeling on how we're trending this year already versus compared to last year?
Mr. Biskin might know where we're at this year.
It is at a higher rate. I don't have a specific number, but Ms. Kuntz and I were talking about that.
I did count the FOIAs in our current FOIA requests, 1,545 pieces of paper had to be scanned.
It's a lot of paper.
Processed. It's a big time-consuming thing. I know that's something that Dr. Schuler has mentioned to us in the past. It's a heavy load. It's important, but it's also takes people away from other things that they could or should be doing. So I'd say that as a point of reference.
Any other questions or comments from board members? All right, thank you, Mr. Biskin.
Thank you.
We have one discussion item on the agenda tonight, and that is the Citizens Advisory Committee agenda topics. Dr. Schuler?
Yeah, so I think Mr. Jerpy had asked if we could circle this back to a board agenda, and so I did. I put together and shared with the board both with the agenda and I think with Friday notes last week, just some proposed topics that our team has identified that we'd like CAC to weigh in on this year, but I certainly wanted to make sure that board members had an opportunity if there's anything else that you wish to throw into the hopper for us to consider with that group. Happy to do so.
Board members?
Just a question, and I should have done my research on this, but when was the last time that calendars and transportation, which I know are somewhat perennial topics, were reviewed with the CAC?
Like the school calendar?
Yeah.
Yeah, would have been 2 years ago. So we are due to renew our calendar here this fall. That's going to be something that I know is going to be on Mr. Biskin's plate here shortly. I would anticipate that will likely get in front of that group in some form or
I was going
function.
to mention that as well as transportation, which ties into the calendar from at least a scheduling aspect. Also seems to fit hand in hand with that start of school day, end of school day, in addition to the number of instructional days at start of year, end of year. So just holistically, I was going to recommend that those might be appropriate topics. The other one, really kind of reflecting on ourselves as a board, I was going to tee up for any input. Is it worth engaging the CAC on how the board and the community interact, both from an educational standpoint to share with them our current practices and the legal and policy guardrails that we operate within, but then also to solicit feedback from the CAC on what they see and hear in the community regarding the quality and nature of our interactions. So more of a board feedback topic for the CAC.
Oh, can we go back to the I don't understand the transportation point.
Yeah, so in the past, it's been discussed, should, for instance, the bus schedules be flipped so that high schoolers and that whole topic. There's also, though, a financial aspect to transportation that I think the CAC should have an awareness of in terms of both the bus portion of transportation costs, and I know it was eye-opening for me to see the district's spend and the rationale for spend on things like taxi services and other transportation.
Got it. Thank you. Appreciate that.
So that's not a calendar thing. It's a school start date issue related to transportation.
Yeah, and they felt just as there's bundling of multiple topics into some of these meetings, I felt that those two could fit hand in hand within a CAC meeting.
So going back to your, because I want to get clarity on transmission, going back to your point about the communication kind of connection, can you expand on that a little bit for me?
Yeah, so just, educating the CAC on how we interact with the community, both formal mechanisms, things like coffee with the board, that maybe not everyone is aware of, educating them on some of the reasons why we interact in the way we do. The OMA guidelines around things like public comment, our board principle guidelines around the fact that we are individuals and we can't engage with the community in a way where I speak as the board. So that education, but then also asking them, are there other ways that they would like to be able to engage with the board so that we understand that community perspective?
Thanks, that's helpful. Board member, any other thoughts?
No, just I like the topics on here, especially the January conversation about AI and the impact on education. I will note that I'm attending the October 18th. Looks like facility-related topic. I will not be at the committee of the whole that follows that by a week, which I believe that the same information is going to be shared. So I'll get the ability to hear what the community says in that meeting. So I think you're going to that too. Yeah.
I like the topic. So two things that came to my mind just for consideration are, one was a finance topic. You might not have anyone show up to that meeting, but there are a lot of things that Dave talked about in the finance report. School finance is such a dense topic, and even understanding these funds, and I almost think of them like separate bank accounts, that it might be good to provide School Finance 101 to a select group of our community. And I think there's a lot of conversations of, different aspects that have a financial impact, and maybe understanding some of the background I think would be helpful. And then, similar to the HR update, we've thankfully been in a position where we've been able to fill slots, but the teacher shortage is something that we feel and something that other school districts feel. And some kind of a topic on that, and all of how we heard with the teachers here today, all of the work that our teachers do in those sessions where they talk together. I think kind of understanding what it's like to be a teacher and what the landscape is like would be helpful.
Just one data point on the notion of finance as a topic, and not to say it's not a great idea. I was surprised as we went through the budget process that there was literally zero community feedback. And maybe on one hand that represents an opportunity, to your point, to educate the community by way of the CAC. On the other hand, does that indicate a degree of disinterest? I'm not sure.
Any other pieces of feedback?
I just want to comment on Julie's thoughts about what it means to be a teacher and all the different activities. I think that would be a great conversation with the CAC.
Just
Dave?
one comment. The January topic also caught my eye, and just curious if we're going to hear about that, like in your IT update. Good, then I don't have to go to the January.
Any other feedback?
Yeah,
We get some clarity.
and we can flush through some of these. I just will kind of remind you to think about those topics. I've really tried to, I guess, frame out topics for CAC where it is going to be more than just a one-way communication out. I think actually Eric might remember, because I think he was on CAC very early, and probably in the first couple of years we did a lot of presenting information and then heard back, rightfully so, from CAC. Don't just throw stuff at us. Bring us topics where there's genuinely a piece to frame. So the topics aren't bad, but I guess I'll just ask you to maybe not tonight, but think one step further to say, around those topics, are there really like questions we wish to have the community weigh in on tied to those? Because the meetings where we're just giving them like 40 minutes of blah, that
None of this is
no, it's not blah. The topics are not blah. But I'm just asking, even it's true around finance, right? Like, we can give them lots of great information, but if we don't actually have a question they can engage around than that committee of 37 people, unless we are specifically saying around this point, your task is to take that and share it with 15 other people in the community. Just think about that as you're framing these topics. Great ideas. Just I'll prime your thinking one more to say, like, what do you want the community? I think the way Eric framed out the communication piece, great topic, because you're really asking them for something. Like, help us with, how we advance this. And that's what we've tried to do around even the AI piece. There is a key question we're asking lots of people across the organization, which is like, this is AI, but now let's talk about what's the impact as we think about education in year, 5 years, 10 years.
No, it's great. Thank you. All right. We did have some of our committee reports interspersed with the consent agendas, but I think we still want to talk about an item in the Finance Committee. Dr. Schuler?
Well, I think it was just the abatement piece, and I actually I feel like for tonight we framed it out. The goal was to frame it out tonight, make sure it's in front of the board, likely bring that back to your next meeting for the board once you've had a little bit of time to think about it, read this information, to engage in discussion and start to frame some direction.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave. Eric. All right, reports. Are there any other reports from board members tonight that we haven't covered? Ms.
I don't know
Wagner?
that this is a report, but we received an email earlier today, and Dr. Salagi, who was right behind me. So, thank you for inviting Michelle Denault to come and present to our administrators and some staff. So I think that is a good response to some of the needs that we have. So thank you.
Any other reports from board members? All right, we have 5 written reports that the board goes through. It's also they're located in the agenda available to the public. But we have the monthly finance reports, the Freedom of Information Act report, the board communications log, the Citizens Advisory Committee report, and the teacher administrative and IMRF compensation reports. We have 3 reports for three topics for future discussion: universal full-day kindergarten, school and district state report cards, middle school facilities community engagement report. Any other topics that board members want considered for future discussion?
Yes.
Ms. Blattner?
So I think I shared it with you already. If we can learn about purchasing the visitor screening tools that we use at our high school for our other schools, that's one. And then if we could, and this may be more of a committee topic for future discussion, consider a formal volunteer policy, an adoption of that.
Yeah, I would imagine that work would start at the policy.
Committee. Okay.
Yeah, it makes sense to me.
Thank you.
That makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Great. Any other topics for board for future?
Can I just mention one thing? I
Yes.
guess ask a question. So the request in looking, some of that came obviously from the feedback from a community member asking about purchasing those visitor management systems. That is something that the district's looked at a few times in the past. I actually think that might be a slightly more productive conversation if we consider that in the context of a few other safety updates that we've been focused on. So Dr. O'Keefe, Mr. Biskin, Dr. Kyle, and Mr. Spencer have actually worked through the end of last year on a pretty significant grant that we've applied for, and we haven't gotten an answer yet on that grant. But I think actually just sort of understanding how we've prioritized need and spend in the security space then can get us into that conversation. I think important for the board. I would hate to see you focus only on like one security tool in isolation away from sort of some of the other priorities we've mapped out as well. So if the board would be amenable to that, we could kind of make that the focus of which then we can dive specifically into that one piece.
And that will be our next meeting, or?
We can do it at the next meeting,
Okay.
sure.
Thank you.
All right, board. Our next regular board meeting will be October 11th at Sandburg Elementary School. Coming up, we have our first coffee with the board on Saturday, September 16, which, if my calendar is right, is Saturday. And we're going to do it at Edison and Franklin. So we're going to break into 2 groups. The board will break into 2 groups. And so we'll get you guys assigned into those groups, and we'll get a communication out tomorrow, I'm guessing, on that. Our next committee of the whole meeting will be on September 27th at the School Service Center. We do have a closed session topic tonight, so we're going to be moving into that closed session. So, Board, I need a motion and a second to adjourn to closed session pursuant to the Illinois Open Meetings Act exemption 5 LCS 120/2, Part C, Part 1. Can someone second that, please?
Second.
Second by Mr. Paulson. Ms. Hutchison, will you please call the roll? Yes.
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 All right, we're adjourned to closed session. There is no action expected following the closed session tonight. Thank you.